Welcome, 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 everybody. It's Retention Academy time. It is week 10 of Retention Academy. So glad to have you with us this afternoon. I'm Suzanne Spear here at ACU. I'm the Director of Workforce Development. And today I am joined once again by our awesome faculty, Ann Hogan and Mariah Blake. Ann Hogan is with us today as our presenter once again, talking about management and communication for retention. And we're super excited to hear about that this afternoon. So once again, as we always do each webinar, we just wanted to do some housekeeping items, go over some housekeeping items. So we are recording this webinar, and once again, if you want to hop on the discussion board afterwards and download the recording of this and listen to it again, or if for some reason you had to jump off during a portion of this and want to re-listen to it, then you can go back and re-listen to it. We'll also upload the slides at the conclusion of today's webinar. Don't forget to ask questions as we go along. And of course, as always, we like to have fun here at ACU and the STAR Center. So if you do have questions during the presentation, you can raise your hand in your controls box. You can use the chat and questions boxes, and it will alert us that you have a question, and we will get to those questions at the end of today's webinar. And if you have any technical difficulties or any connection issues, feel free to email Mariah at mblake@clinicians.org. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ann, and she's going to take it away.
Hello, thank you, Suzanne. This is Ann, and welcome everyone. It is week 10. It's amazing we've gotten this far. We only have a couple weeks left, so it's exciting. Before we start, real quick, I just want to let you know that some additional stay interview questions were loaded into the discussion board, and then if you have any, be sure to share those also. So if you were looking for that document, it is up on the discussion board. And it's just a few sample questions that you may start to look at for your state interview questions from our previous webinars. Now, today we're going to talk about retention, and specifically about management and communication. We only have 30 minutes, and this is like a 30-year process of management and communication. So we have 30 minutes, so I'm going to go over some basics that maybe they're basics, but maybe they're things that you kind of forget to think about, right? Sometimes we want to make things so difficult that we don't really come down to the basics of this. So when we look at retention, so when we, oops, my mouse is going crazy. What do employees want to know? And when you think about this, think about yourself, just kind of like we did 2 weeks ago. Think about what it is that you want to know. So one, you want to know, like, who are you supposed to listen to, right? Who can support them in their duties? Like, who do they go to? Who can help them? Who do they report to? People always want to know kind of who is my direct report? Who do I go to for questions? And then same thing, who can I go to get the answers from? And ultimately, who can they actually trust when they communicate, right? So think about that as we go through these slides, that those are 5 questions that all employees want to know the answer to when they're starting a job, when they're in their job, wherever they're at the organization. They want to know, how do they find out these answers? Now, there are some different ways. So your typical functional organizational structure looks something like this. And me being an HR person, put a CHRO on there, even though many organizations don't recognize that position yet, but they will be soon. So we have the board of directors, obviously, in a community health center. The board of directors is responsible to oversee how the organization does things. But the CEO is the one that's responsible to hire and fire the staff and make day-to-day decisions and some strategic decisions about the health center. Now, typically, we have the chief medical officer, chief dental officer, a CFO, operations, you might call them administration. There could be a number of different names. But typically, your organizational structure starts like this. Then you break it down into your medical department, your dental department, all the different departments, administration, finance, accounting, all your different areas. And that's where it gets complicated as to where do employees go for answers, right? So we all want to say, well, of course, you just go up the chain of command, which is kind of this organizational structure. But where confusion comes in is actually in the next slide here, which is your divisional structure. And your divisional structure is actually where people function on a day-to-day, right? So you may have divisions of medical, dental, pharmacy, you may have I'm just behavioral health. I was thinking of like outreach, education. You may have different sites. And think about how that structure is there. So even though I'm a nurse practitioner, say in site B, I report to the medical director, but if I'm in site B, I probably have a site manager there that I also report to. I may have someone that's in charge of the medical area in site B that I also report to. I may also work very cohesively with the dental, pharmacy, and behavioral health sites. I also may have to supervise your medical assistants or your outreach workers or your education people that are in that site, or possibly even the front desk, depending on how small the clinic is. So all of a sudden, where you're reporting to and where you're getting answers from is very blurred. And so that's something to think about when you're communicating to employees. Where can they go for those answers or the questions we asked earlier? Who should they listen to? Do they listen to their site manager? Does their site manager repeat what they learned from, say, the medical director or from the COO? How is that communication funneling through your organization so everyone's on the same page? So really think about the complexity of your organization, whether it's small or large. Too often we get kind of stuck on the previous slide, right? We get stuck on this is our organizational structure. This is how we function. Well, in reality, you may function that way, and that may be your actual decision point, but this divisional structure is where a lot of people live in your organization, and they just don't know where to go. So think real hard about how you're communicating to your divisional structures and how that message is getting passed along, and is it consistent with what the organization is actually doing. So that's really important to look at that divisional structure. Now, as we all know, communication is a two-way street, right? So it's not only leadership to employees or employees to leadership or employees to patients, patients to employees. It's a definite two-way street. And sometimes we need ideas to come from what they call the bottom up, which would be from your employees to leadership. I don't really like that. I think it's kind of come across from your employees to leadership. You're all in the same boat, right? You're all rowing down the same river, trying to serve as many patients in a comprehensive way. So sometimes we don't need that division between leadership and employees, but there is. I mean, there's a responsibility of each position. So, but when it comes to communication, how are you opening that up? And really think about how you do that. Many of you in this call are in a leadership role. Many of us want to think that we have an open door policy. We really listen to employees. And hopefully we do all of those things. But a lot of times we also think we're listening when maybe we're not hearing as well as we should. So think about how you can generate ideas from the employees, how you can generate thoughts and improvements and areas that need to be focused on from your employees. And part of that, as you look at your stay interviews from last week, when you look at those questions, you can modify those questions to start opening up communication between employees and leadership. So think about how that's done. Additionally, think about how leadership is communicating to employees. I was talking to someone last week, and I was talking to an employee, and they said, we love that leadership has changed their ways and they communicate everything to us now, but there's just too many emails. And so it was more like, can they make it more concise? Can they maybe do it once a week? This particular employee was getting inundated with emails every day. And she said, it's wonderful. I do know what's going on in the organization, but it's overwhelming. And she said, and additionally, I have an administrative role. I sit at my desk and I can read emails. The problem is your medical staff, your dental staff, your pharmacy staff, they're not, we don't want them sitting at their desk reading emails, right? We want them seeing patients. And so think of maybe alternative ways in which you can get that communication out that is important, but maybe a little bit more concise than, say, 5 emails a week on important issues. So in an organization that I worked for, what we did is we would have one person that was designated as kind of a communications person, and they would send out emails that everyone needed to read. They were general. The information was important, but not urgent and not like we have to do something now, right? And if that happened, or if there was an advocacy alert from NAC, and it had to be like we really needed people to gain attention to this, we actually had our CEO send it out. And that was how we decided that we would start communicating with staff, because they didn't know. They had the same complaint. Do we look at everything that comes through? Do we need to know all of this stuff? We have too much on our plate. Tell us what's really important. So that's how we did it. So if something came from someone else in administration, it was important, but it wasn't like, I have to read this, I have to sign off on it, I have to know it. It wasn't life or death. But when it came to funding and advocacy and different really important decisions that the organization had made, maybe they changed a policy, etc., the CEO then would send that out. So just think about how much communication goes out to your employees and how you solicit communication back from your employees. Now, when we talk about that communication, my slides now will go through. We want to let them know what's happening in the organization. That's always important. So remember what is happening. Sometimes, too often, we use our new employees. When our new employees come, we have this big fanfare. Maybe everybody meets with them, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes we forget the people that have been there 3 years, 5 years, a lot has changed. And maybe they're not up to date. So think about what's happening in the organization and what's important. And especially, I've talked to people that said, wow, we got this big award, or we became certified in this, or we had all these great quality measures met, but I read it in the local newspaper when a journalist came by and got a story, but I didn't know it, and I actually worked there, and I had to read it in the newspaper. So think about all those different things that you can kind of toot your horn on, but make sure you let everyone in the organization know what's going on. And if things are not going so well, let them know. Obviously, give them hope that we're going to get it changed, and we're going to, what they need to do, how they fit into making you survive for another year or 2 or 6 months. Whatever it is, let them know what their piece is in having things happen in the organization. And I think that actually you'll get quite good responses, has been my experience. So think about, even if it's not good news, let people in on what is happening in the organization. Additionally, let them feel included in your decision making, what you can. There's several people on the line that are CEOs, CMOs, in those leadership roles. And there are decisions that absolutely those positions and only those positions can make. But sometimes it'd be nice to solicit, information on decisions from your actual employees and the people that are out there doing the job. So make sure that you include them in the decision making, what you can, and think about, does this decision need to be made right now, or can I sit on it for, say, a week and get input from people? So, and then there's certain decisions, again, that you have to make, and they have to be made right now. And they don't require employee input. I understand that. But those that do, or that can influence the decision that you might make, if you had more input, think about putting that out to the employees and asking them what they think of it. And that makes them feel included and really encourages engagement with employees. And then the next one is let them know your expectations. And the expectations we'll talk about on the next slide. But really, it's very important. People want to have a framework in which what their expectations are. And that goes for any of us, right? So if we have all the freedom in the entire world, things kind of fall apart because we don't know where we should spend our time, our effort, our priorities. We really don't have priorities at that point. So if you let people know your expectations for the organization as a whole and how they fit into that, you will see your communication and your engagement with the staff will improve dramatically. Now the next one is the expectations. So when you think about your expectations, all of us say we want wonderful customer service, we want to have a plan for customer service, all of these different things. But what is our actual expectation? And one of the best examples, there's actually a few of them, but there's three that I can think of off the top of my head. One would be the Disney Corporation. One would be Ritz-Carlton, or pretty much any hospitality chain these days because they're in such competition. And then also Southwest Airlines. So when you think about these three organizations, it doesn't, I mean, they obviously have employees, and employees sometimes have issues, right? But how many times have you had a bad experience if you've been to any of those three areas? Personally, I've never been to a Ritz-Carlton, but I've read a lot of how they do things. But when you look at Disney or you look at Southwest Airlines, Disney has a very distinct expectation. The expectation is that when those employees are out in the park, they are cast members and they are in costume and in their actor mode, right? They don't break character. They are not allowed to break character during that time. And when they go back underground into their tunnels, that's when they can kind of be themselves. But as soon as they enter that park, this is the mode and the character they are playing. And it doesn't matter regardless of the jobs that they have, whether they're working food service, whether they're actually a character, whether they are a ride operator, doesn't matter. They are at that point in character and a cast member of the team. And so when you think about that, their expectations are very well known, and how employees are supposed to act, what they're allowed to do, how they're able to make decisions. All of those things are very spelled out. And so think about how that's spelled out within your own health center. So an employee can feel like they're giving good customer service and have good communication with patients, and they've gotten good communication from leadership to know what their expectations are. So when it comes to values and visions and how you treat customers or other employees, culture is a very big issue right now with any organization, right? We've had all the Me Too movement. We've had a lot of harassment claims that are not necessarily sexual harassment, but there's just been a whole shift in looking at the culture of an organization. Well, so when you look at your values and vision, when it comes to your customers or how employees treat other employees, including how leadership treats employees and how employees respect leadership, when you look at all of that, do you actually live your values and vision? So it's not enough to just have your values and vision statement on your website, but really, are you truly living that values and vision? And are you really respecting each employee and each member of your team? So think about how that actually really plays out in your organization. And I'll tell you, I was speaking with someone last week also, and asked specifically what the mission of their organization was. As I was looking at it on the website, and she had been there in this organization about 3 years, and she stumbled to try to tell me what her mission was. And that was very unfortunate. It was a nonprofit organization, and each employee should be able to rattle that off, but not only rattle it off as to what your mission is, but they should be able to say, we live this mission. We treat each other also with respect. We have values for each person that works here. And, you know, if people need to clean house to make sure that you have everyone on your team that's that way, then that was what you need to do. But make sure everyone knows their values and visions for not only customers, but also your culture and your employees in all areas. Do you allow employees to make decisions when it comes to the customer? And think about that, because an employee, again, we go back to those very first questions that I asked on what employees want to know, right? So an employee, when it comes to communication, one of the most frustrating things, and I'm sure we've all been there, right? So you make a decision as an employee because you base it on your policy or you base it on past history. So you're able to make a decision. And then your manager turns around because the patient might have complained or another employee complained. And what do? They override and they change the decision. Now, that does happen occasionally in all organizations. But if it's consistently happening in your organization and it's something that's a consistent problem, then you need to really look at what your policy, your procedures, or ask yourself, why am I not allowing the employee to make that decision? Because that's what we always do anyway, right? So there's certain things that you can't allow an employee to necessarily break policy or bend the policy on. But sometimes we are so set on that's the way it's supposed to be that we don't allow people to make some good decisions. So when it comes to, when you look at, say, United Airlines with their employees not being able to make a decision regarding the crew that was going to fly, and they ended up pulling that gentleman off the plane, right? So that was a very poor decision. And if they maybe had used a little more common sense, that decision would have never been made. So think about what decisions your employees are making. Can you give them more leeway, or can you communicate how you want them to respond to your patients or your customers or your vendors or other employees? That will help your communication a lot with employees, because we've all been there. We've all had people override decisions or change decisions, and it's frustrating. But if it's done consistently, that is a huge retention problem for your staff. And it doesn't matter if they're physicians, if they're dentists, if they're front desk, if they're your outreach workers, your administrative workers. It doesn't matter. If it's something that's consistent, you need to take a look at that very clearly and figure out what you can do to change that expectation, I guess, in how decisions are made and communication is done. So to review this, because I want to leave a few minutes for questions, just ensure that employees know where to go to get answers to their questions, right? Where do we go? Do we use that functional chart or do we use that divisional chart? And does the functional chart communicate with the divisional chart so everybody's on the same page? Or, same thing, the divisional chart is usually the people that are out there actually doing the patient work on a day-to-day basis, right? And so are they communicating to that functional chart the challenges they're having or where there's opportunities to improve? So think about how that communication goes between those two charts. It's something we don't usually think about too much. But think about that. And then think about where your employees get their questions answered or where they're getting their information from. And is that consistent throughout the entire organization? And then who's in charge of decisions? Again, it comes back to what decisions can they make? What decisions do they need to go to other people to help them make? Or if they're out there by themselves at the clinic, can they use their best judgment and make a decision? Or do they have to wait until someone from administration calls them back? And there's certain things that are that way, but there's certain things that you may be able to bend a little bit on. So just look at your policies and think about what is like a consistent problem we have that maybe we can change. And then let people know by default who they can listen to. And so it may be that they can listen to their medical assistant supervisor, right? Like, is that the final person they should listen to, or should they always listen to the physician in the clinic? Or should they always listen just for the CEO's voice? And it doesn't matter which one it is. They just need to know where they go and who they listen to. And then let them know what's going on in the organization. Again, it's not that hard to do. And then also ask for their suggestions for improvement. And my very last slide before we ask for questions is kind of a recap of all the different things that we've done during the Retention Academy and the Recruitment Academy too, which is just kind of 8 things that you can do to improve recruitment or retention. And that's always hire for a good fit, ask people what tools they need to do their job, ask what would make their job better, always stay true to your mission, that's important, communicate with people all the time, recognize people in teams, always invest in your staff, and that doesn't always mean money. Train your managers on how to manage people and how to communicate with their staff. And those 8 things can totally impact your retention and your recruitment processes. So with that, I thank you, and we will open it up for questions. And next week we have, and just real quick, I'll just say, next week we do have office hours. We will have an assignment up. It'll be Wednesday the 18th at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So mark your calendars, please.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Yeah.
Comments,
questions? Yeah, absolutely. Let's open it up for questions. So you can put your questions in the questions or chat box, and Mariah will let us know if any come in. And next week is our last office hour, so you definitely don't want to miss that. Again, just a reminder to thanks so much for those who are posting their homework, and even if we are not, the faculty are not responding to your homework, we are reading them, and I would love it if all of you all would take a look at the other folks' homework and just to see if you can get any ideas or thoughts or suggestions for anything that other folks might be doing. So yeah, definitely join us next week at 2 o'clock for our last office hour. And Mariah, do we have a question come in?
We did. We had one
questions come in. Okay,
yeah,
great.
From
Go right ahead, Ann.
And Lander's, I'm going to put up. Lander asked, what do you think of dyad models for leadership effective? And I will put some information up there on the discussion board for that that kind of addresses that. So I think that's a little bit longer question. And then yeah, and let's see, how do we help people feel included? That's from Terry Stratton. So how do you help people feel included? I think what she's saying is that you have to have trust, right? So employees have to feel like they can trust you and come to you. But you can include them through, if you have, first of all, you should be having regular staff meetings with an agenda, not just a free-for-all. Have specific things that you're going to talk about, whether it be starting with your strategic plan and how they fit into that. A lot of people just think they work out in the clinics and they don't see how their work, they see how it ties to the patient, right? They're the direct patient caregivers, but they don't see how it's overall tied to the organization. And especially sometimes in community health, like this last year, right? Everyone focused on the cliff, right? But the medical assistant or the person out at the clinic, they were just caring, is their job even going to be there? And how do I serve this patient that's in front of me, right? So, but that was a good opportunity to open it up and say how they impact that decision that's being made by Congress, how they can get involved in advocacy, what the importance of advocacy is, how they fit into that bigger picture. And even when it comes to your strategic plan or your quality measures, do you share that out with all that staff that actually does that work? Do they know how many immunizations they gave last year? Do they know how many babies were delivered? Do they know how many 2-year-olds had all their immunization records? Do they know how many teeth they extracted last year, how many fluorides they gave? You know, information like that will help employees understand that their job is important and how it ties to the bigger picture of the organization. And sometimes we report that on the, you know, we report all sorts of numbers on UDS and all sorts of paperwork, but we forget to actually involve our employees and let them know how they fit in. So any other questions? Mariah, if you could ask them to me.
Yeah, I think we are actually out of time today, Anne. So what we're going to do is excuse me, if there were any other questions that came in, we will continue our practice of answering them on the office hours. So stay tuned for that. And Anne, thanks so much for a great presentation on some things that folks can do to help with their communication skills and management in their retention plans and activities. So thanks again, everyone, for joining in, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye.